If you haven't read this book, After the Ball by Kirk and Madsen, you really should, because it set the propaganda agenda for the 1990s gay liberation movement. And because of that, it's also the blueprint for the LGBTQ plus movement and, in fact, the entirety of woke culture today. I'll just take you through a couple of the most important parts in it. The trick is to get the bigot into the position of feeling a conflicting twinge of shame. This can be accomplished in a variety of ways, all making use of repeated exposure to pictorial images or verbal statements that are incompatible with his self-image as a well-liked person, one who fits in with the rest of the crowd. Now, shame stems from impropriety, saying the wrong thing, and that sense of what's right and what's wrong can be reinforced through social pressure, and that's exactly what's happening here. The idea of wanting to be well liked and not wanting to say the wrong thing that causes shame is what gives the leverage to this movement, so that some ideas just aren't talked about, even if they might be true. Note that the point here isn't that you've said something factually incorrect, just that it's socially impermissible. Thus, propagandistic advertisement can depict homophobic and homo-hating bigots as crude loudmouths and assholes. It can show them being criticised, hated, shunned. It can, in short, link homo-hating bigotry with all sorts of attributes the bigot would be ashamed to possess, and with social consequences he would find unpleasant and scary. Rather than addressing the arguments that are deemed homophobic, instead they are being associated with loudmouths, assholes, and general crudity. So the idea here is to link anybody who holds these views that are deemed unacceptable to other people who also are deemed unacceptable. The effect is shunning and depends again on shame. Note the importance of social consequences. So you have to be someone, in order to be susceptible to this, who cares more about your status than whether what you are saying is true. When the bigot sees someone like himself being disapproved of and disliked by ordinary Joes, he will feel just what they feel and transfer it to himself. This wrinkle effectively elicits shame and doubt. Once again, we can see the importance of shame, but what's really interesting here is it's about seeing yourself through other people's eyes. That becomes the measure of whether what you're doing is right or not. So everything depends upon caring deeply about what other people think of you. And in this way, the policing of opinions becomes more and more extreme. Now, it doesn't actually matter whether or not these views that are being suppressed are correct, because there's no attempt made to actually address the arguments. Propaganda relies more upon emotional manipulation than upon logic, since its goal is, in fact, to bring about a change in the public's feelings. It's about an appeal to sentiment throughout. Our effect is achieved without reference to facts, logic, or proof, but through repeated infralogical emotional conditioning. Now, the first step to being able to resist this is to recognize it is happening, stay conscious of it, and that will rob it of its power. You have to be willing to be despised precisely for being on the side of facts and logic and proof. Now, where does victim imagery and the victim narrative come into this? The purpose of victim imagery is to make straights feel very uncomfortable. That is, to jam them with shame. And remember, shame is just about impropriety, saying the wrong thing socially. Jam with shame the self-righteous pride that would ordinarily accompany and reward their anti-gay belligerence, and to lay groundwork for the process of conversion by helping straights identify with gays and sympathize with their underdog status. So take careful note of this. Playing the victim is important because people tend to root for an underdog. So the underdog status is being deliberately weaponized. The public should be persuaded that gays are victims of circumstance, that they no more choose their sexual orientation than they did, say, their height, skin color, talents, or limitations. We argue that, for all practical purposes, gays should be considered to have been born gay. Now, note that they don't actually make the claim that gays were born gay. They're just saying that practically, if you want sexual orientation to come across in a convincing way in the victim narrative, then making sure it's presented as something that's not chosen, i.e., akin to race, is crucial. The objective is to make homo-hating beliefs and actions look so nasty that average Americans want to dissociate themselves from them. We also intend by this tactic to make the very expression of homo-hatred so discreditable that even intransigence will eventually be silenced in public. Remember the point before that this isn't about facts, logic, or proof. It's just about how people worry they will be seen. So you couldn't have it put more clearly here. The idea is to silence certain opinions because the social cost of expressing them is too high. Social consequences were mentioned earlier. And this bit is fascinating because you can see how the victim narrative is paramount. Suspected child molesters will never look like victims, but they know that they are a part of the gay movement because man-boy love is an integral part of gay culture since ancient times. So the advice to them is, we're not judging you, but others do. Please keep a low profile. So the paedophiles aren't told to stop. They're just told to play it quiet because it's quite difficult to use them in the PR campaign. Just in case anyone is doubting this, let's just hear it straight from David Thorsted, who was the former president of New York's Gay Activists Alliance. He's a historian of the gay rights movement, and he was also instrumental from the inception of the gay rights movement in trying to decriminalize adults having sex with children. Boy lovers were involved in the gay movement from the beginning, and their presence was tolerated. Now, the same authors also wrote an important magazine article where they said that at a later stage of the media campaign for gay rights, it will be time to get tough with remaining opponents. To be blunt, they must be vilified. And that is where we are today, not just with this particular issue of gay rights, but with woke culture in general. So rather than seeing ideas discussed openly, rigorously, and rationally, what you get instead is most of the time one or more of these fallacies. The first one is poisoning the well. This is when you reject an argument based on a purportedly disreputable motive on the part of the person giving it. You don't actually address the strengths of the argument. So, for example, some views might just be a cloak for bigotry or hatred. We also get, very often, the comparison of any of these viewpoints that they don't want to be heard, the ones they want to be silenced, to racism. But that's begging the question, because whether they really are akin to racism is exactly the point at stake. You see this one a lot too. Certain viewpoints, certain arguments are just so bad. They shouldn't be engaged with seriously. It's just ridiculous. Nobody can believe that in 2021. One of the objections to the patriarchy paradox was that apparently it was just moronic. Well, that's not an argument. The other one we get, and you'll see this a lot, is the appeal to majority fallacy. This is especially common now because the education system is so dominated by the left that there are hand-waving attempts at dismissing any ideas that don't fit the orthodox culture. None of us, none of the clever people believe that. And the question to ask yourself here is that, well, if all the clever people disagree with this viewpoint, why are they so afraid of it? Why can't they answer it coherently? Why do they have to shut down the people who challenge their ideas? And then we get the fallacy that anyone who takes that kind of view is going to have trouble gaining or maintaining employment in the profession. Now, it's similar to the appeal to majority, but it again uses the threat of prestige and status to try to silence dissidents. But probably the most important is the fallacy of appeal to emotion. If you hurt somebody's feelings, if the arguments that you put forward are offensive, then they must be wrong. Now, there's no logic whatsoever there. There's no connection between whether an idea is right or wrong necessarily and how much it upsets people. In fact, if anything, truth hurts. Funnily enough, we can see some of these at play in this article that was published in The Times when my story broke surrounding the patriarchy paradox. You'd think that someone who is a national journalist would be able to put together some fairly hard-hitting, coherent arguments against a video made for school children. But instead, let's note what we get. So, headline, your misogyny lessons are cancelled, boys. Eton can't afford to play the dunce. Whether it actually is misogynistic is the point that's under discussion. So, begging the question right from the outset there, that word itself also involves the idea that it's hateful or hurtful. Playing the dunce is appeal to ridicule, so suggesting that the ideas are too stupid to be taken seriously. The first sign of trouble is the title Nolan knows. Only a man who thinks he's right about every last thing would give his social media stream such a name. Or someone who just likes a joke and thinks the alliteration is memorable. The second is the gratingly confident and condescending tone of his voiceover. So rather than addressing the actual ideas, we're getting on to questions of tone. It sounds like somebody's hypersensitive. Over the course of a bizarre 33 minutes, again, bizarre is what you should be arguing for, not assuming. You watched in stunned silence as the Eton teacher Will Nolan delivers a rambling online lesson to pupils. So the closest we've got to an argument so far is calling it rambling, bizarre, complaining about the tone, and assuming that I think I'm right about everything. Well, one thing I'm definitely right about is that there's no argument here.